Hey guys, Zach here, and today I want to talk to you guys about algae. Now, more specifically, I want to talk to you guys about ways you can utilize the algae that does grow in your tank. Before I get into it, if you guys could subscribe down below, it does help out the channel. With that out of the way, let's get into it. The first way I like to try and utilize the algae in my tanks is just using the algae itself as an indicator. Now, what I mean by using algae as an indicator is waiting to see if it does appear in some of my healthy tanks. This tells me a couple of things. The first is just that the tank is healthy and it is becoming an ecosystem. Algae is part of a lot of natural systems. It's not necessarily bad for your tank. Generally speaking, it is just kind of an eyesore and it can take over if left untreated, but it does indicate that the system itself is very healthy. Now, the second thing it does indicate to me is that I have an overage in either the lighting or the nutrients. Now, with the algae appearing because of either excess nutrients or excess light, that's a really good sign to me that I have built up and I've provided enough for all of the inhabitants and the plants in the tank. If I'm putting my timer on and I've got my lights on and the algae appears and I haven't really been feeding the tank too much and I see that it does make an appearance and start to grow either on the glass, on the rocks, on the plants, wherever it might grow, I know that I've got a little bit too much light for the plant mass that is in my aquarium, and I can dial back my lighting a little bit, and I'll dial it back little by little until I see either the algae start to slowly disappear, or I see the plants start to take over the algae. And then I know I've got the light real dialed in and that I'm providing enough for the plants without providing too much and creating that excess for algae to grow. Nutrient-wise, when I'm providing too much nutrient to the tank, as in the form of like fish food and it's going wasted, and now it's just free-floating in the water column, and the algae can access those nutrients and start to grow, what I will tend to do is just, again, dial back on the amount of food that I put into the tank. I know that the fish are eating, but they're not eating everything I'm putting in, or they're just leaving it. Maybe they don't like it. Maybe they've got other stuff in the tank, like I've got copepods in the tank and they're eating those more than the food that I'm giving them. I know I can dial back on the feeding a little bit and I'll see, okay, did that affect the algae growth that's in the tank? Yes or no? Okay, I can either dial back more or I'll re-up and start feeding more again. Using the algae as an indicator allows me to make these micro adjustments slowly over time to greater benefit the health of the tank, and it also prevents me from doing something too extreme to one side or to the other that could negatively affect the health of the tank. The second way I like to utilize algae is by intentionally growing it out in a couple of my tanks and using it as a food source. Now, what I mean by using it as a food source is when I'm going to be away from my tanks for days at a time, maybe even a week, I will intentionally try and grow out a little bit of algae because I know that the inhabitants actually do like to snack on algae. Most fish will snack on algae, especially if you're away and you can't feed them as consistently. They'll snack on the algae because it is so nutrient packed that it's a viable food source for those fish, and especially if you're going to be away, you either have to leave very detailed instructions for anyone who is looking after your tanks, or what I personally like to do is just make sure that all of the food's already in the tank before I leave, in the form of algae or copepods or whatever it might be microorganism-wise, that just allows the tank to keep itself running for that week or those couple of days that I am away. Now, there are a couple of warnings to go along with this utilization of algae. The first is just being, while most fish will, in smaller aquariums, do be careful. Some fish just don't like algae, and it's sometimes from species to species, but sometimes it's from fish to fish. I've had tanks where I've had guppies that will eat algae, and I've had tanks where I've had guppies that don't eat algae. It's really up to the fish individually, and you do have to see this beforehand if you're going to do something like this. The second warning that I do want to tell you guys about is just that it can be hard to control the amount of algae that does grow when you are trying to slowly introduce it into your tank to use as a food source. So do be careful because it can get out of hand if you're not super careful with it, and it can grow a lot faster than your plants do. So be careful not to give it too much light and let it grow too big before you go away and you come back and it's overrun your tank. Now, the third way I like to utilize algae is actually outside of the tank. So this is for you guys out there who don't want to have algae in your tank and you want to remove it right away and get rid of it. This is something that I like to do when I don't want it in my tank. Now, what I'll do with this algae that I'm removing from the tank is actually put it into some soil, into some pots, and use it as fertilizer in my terrestrial plants. Now, algae is super nutrient packed, and it's just basically a bundle of nutrients. So when you do take it out of the water and you put it into soil, as it does break down, it releases all those nutrients into the soil itself. And I found that this does greatly help the health of any of the terrestrial plants that I do put into these pots. Now, this is not just limited to algae. I also do this with some duckweed. I have found that duckweed and algae have really helped in my pots, and it really grows the plants quite well, and it acts as a sort of fertilizer that's kind of a byproduct of having aquariums, right? If I have a tank with duckweed in it, the duckweed takes over. If I have a aquarium with too much algae in it, I'll just scoop it all out and I'll put it into the soil so that I can keep propagating some terrestrial plants. Now, utilizing algae in your soil kind of depends on what type of algae you have and whether or not you can use it or not. Like if you have green spot algae that's really stuck on glass or stuck on rocks, you're probably not going to be able just to stick your hand in, take it out and shove it in the soil, right? But stuff like blackbeard algae, the blue-green algae, hair algae, stuff that you can pretty much remove easily, you can put into your soil and use it as that fertilizer. But if you have something that's like algae free floating in the water, like it's just green water, or you've got that green spot algae stuff that's really stuck, when you do scrape it off and you siphon out water or try and siphon that out, what you can do is put it in a bucket and use it to water your plants, because all of those nutrients are still in the algae and in the water, and the terrestrial plants really benefit from that, and you don't run the risk of having the algae start growing again out of your pots if you're watering in moderation. So that is everything for this video. If you guys do have any other ways that you like to use algae from your tanks, please let me know down below in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please consider subscribing, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.